Super. Okay. A very warm welcome from me too to this evening's session. So I've got a few slides here. I thought we'd just run through what I've got to say and then open it up for discussion. So the first thing I'd mention is that, oh, sorry, excuse me when I just, my dear puss busy while as she's sitting next to the phone. Yes, so the subject Rethinking Bible, I thought we could perhaps take a step back and look at the Bible as a whole, because we so often discuss its contents in great depth, and so the title made me think. Let's sort of take a step back and see what the Bible is and what its value to us is. So, any thumbs up or thumbs down? I'm assuming if I don't hear anything that everybody can hear me. Right, not getting much of a response there.
You went a bit fuzzy just for a second. Do you mind repeating the question, Marianne?
Yes, can everybody hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, super, right. Oh, whoops. I'm just go there. Right, see if I can just push that down so it's out of the way. Right, so so what I thought was would look at, I didn't know who the audience would be, so I've kind of tried to make it take it two ways, for Christians and for non-Christians, but we'll see how that goes. So I thought we would take three sort of metaphors for what the Bible is, to try and sort of see what to try and sort of understand what it is from a high level. And the first one I thought of was the toolbox. We're all, I think, familiar with that verse. All scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. And although that was written about the Old Testament, I don't suppose anyone will really disagree with me that it seems to be manifestly true of the New Testament. And there are many tools in the box, and I think that one of the things about reading the Bible is it's important to understand the form of the text that you're reading, because it's written in many different styles, many different approaches, and they vary from plain speaking to coaching. We spend a lot of time considering the coaching and the training in the New Testament, training, what one might say, in every good work. And also there are many metaphors and parables, but in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, and many worked examples, good and bad. It was a revelation to me as my younger self many years ago, when the penny finally dropped, that all the people in the characters in the Old Testament who had many wives wasn't because the laws had changed. It was simply because they were a bad example. They were doing badly by having many. That was a bad thing that they had many wives. So it's important to understand and not just sort of read the Bible and think that everything written in it is an example of somebody behaving in a godly fashion. We need to understand what we're reading. And of course, there's witness testimony. and I'll say a few words about later on. So the other thing I think that's not always said is that when reading the Bible, I would say, please engage brain. That might sound a silly thing to say, but there are a number of scientists who are very critical of Bible believers whom they see as uncritically accepting a text and just sort of just putting their suspending rational thought while they're just reading and accepting everything that they're told. And I don't think that's how Jesus taught in the Bible. I don't think that's how God taught in the Bible. And I think a good example of this is the text I've shown here, which occurred just after the feeding of the 5,000. When they went across the lake, the disciples forgot to take bread. Be careful, Jesus said to them. Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And they discussed this among themselves and said, is it because we didn't bring any bread? Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked, you of little faith, why are you talking among yourselves about having no bread? Do you still not understand? Don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? How is it that you don't understand that I was not talking to you about bread? But be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Then they understood that he was not telling them to guard against the yeast used in bread, but against the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And I think that this is a great example of how Jesus, who knows exactly what we're capable of, expects us to understand, to study, to work it out. Just a summary. I don't know about anybody else, but I always like to any work, any document. I always like to sort of see it in terms of a structure, a layout, and this is a picture drawn from a rather old book called The Line Encyclopedia of the Bible. But it's a picture I've had in my mind's eye all these years. That helps me visualize the top level layout of the Bible. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. I simply use the word uncovering at the end to avoid just repeating Revelation, because sometimes we get so familiar with the word we forget what it means. So just moving on from that, the other thing that's, I think, important to realise is that although at a broad level we can talk about the law and the prophets and so forth, actually the different styles of writing there's a bit of a sort of a mix and match among the books. And I'll come back to some points about this later too. As you can see, that there are a lot of different styles. I think we're all very familiar with it, really, but I'm just trying to emphasize the point. And there is obviously more in the books of the law than just simply the Levitical law and the 10 Commandments. And more than just those and history. They do talk about origins as well. But one point I would say is that I think in principle, there is no or very little science in the Bible. You might wonder why, if there's a bit of everything else, that there isn't any science, but I think I would argue that it's science is somewhat opposite to the subject matter of the Bible. And in particular, when we look at origins, I think if you think that the Bible doesn't attempt to be scientific, that explains an awful lot about the first 3 chapters of Genesis and the creation. That the Bible isn't trying to tell us how God created the earth. It's more telling us that he created the earth. And in particular, I think the main function of the first 3 chapters of Genesis is to explain our relationship, the relationship of humanity to God. So if we go on from that. So I've got a little sort of, so the other thing I'd say is that the Old Testament in particular, there's almost like a journey here, starting from these early points, starting from the fall, when Eve first ate the forbidden fruit and gave some to her husband. And so the Lord God banished them from the Garden of Eden. Now, the point I'd like to make here is that the very next sin recorded is with Cain and Abel, that when Cain murdered Abel. Now, I think that's quite remarkable that the first sin is just eating from the forbidden fruit, but then the second sin recorded is murder. And then the next thing is in the time of Noah, the Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time, which is, in one translation, I think it said something like, and his heart was filled with pain. So we've gone from a simple sin to murder to everything's just evil all the time. So I think that apart from setting the scene as to where we are, I think that underpins how virulent sin is. It can be easy to think of sin as being not so bad, but it's like a virulent virus or a cancer or some terrible, terrible disease. And God saw that from the word go, which is why he responded to Adam and Eve quite sharply in the Garden of Eden, I think. But here's the final point here is that Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And so this is perhaps the first of a number of cases where God's looking for something good. He's looking for something to work with after this terrible fall. So going to across, there's something of a journey through the Old Testament, and the journey is one of relationships more than anything else. So, God's looking for good in a world that's become very evil. So after Noah, the next one, well, I'm going to jump a bit from, I'm only going to look at a few of them, but the point here really is that Abraham is known largely in terms of his relationship with God, that he was called a friend of God. And in James, is that familiar scripture, Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. So there's, let's just carry on for a minute. So we know famous men and women of God were in the Bible, but why? And again, Moses, it's about his relationship with God. And this is, obviously a sharp, when God rebuked Miriam and Aaron sharply when they started complaining. And he says, where there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, reveal myself to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him, I speak face to face, clearly, and not in riddles. And he sees the form of the Lord, which is an amazing statement. And so again, Moses is someone who is known by his relationship with God. So, of course, Moses is famous for bringing the Ten Commandments down the mountain and many other aspects of Levitical law. And so I'm trying to sort of convey the sense of a journey here. And I don't know if any of you have heard of things called disclosing tablets. These are, I think they're mainly intended for children. And they're sort of something that you can eat, which will stain the plaque and the tartar on your teeth to show you where it is. I think in this picture, one is pink and one is blue, and one of those is plaque and the other's tartar, and I can't remember which way around it goes. And I'm suggesting that that is partly the function of the law, because God knew ahead of time the difficulty we were going to have obeying the law and keeping his laws. But nevertheless, the law was an important step forward, and it discloses the offence. It discloses where sin, where evil is affecting our behaviour and our decisions and so forth. So moving on through the main part of the Old Testament. So David also is very much known for, I hope everyone can hear me, by the way, because my internet connection is perhaps a little bit dippy. So David is known as a man after God's own heart, which is again really quite remarkable, and is again all about his relationship with God. God actually directly says, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. He will do everything I want him to do. And I just put a little, I don't really want to go into any one of these in huge depth, but I've just put a little note here that from Psalm 139, search me, God, it's one of David's Psalms, and know my heart, test me and know my anxious thoughts, see if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. And I think it may be David's sort of intimacy with God, his honesty, his sense of he's letting God know that he's anxious, but he's saying here he's opening up to God. He's just laying it all on the line, and saying, look, I want to be good. but there may be offensive ways in me, and please help me find them so that I can go in the way everlasting. So there's a sort of a humility there that perhaps others around him didn't have. Right. So moving swiftly on, obviously this list is it's more obvious those I've skipped than those I've included, but I'm just trying to make this a brief sort of sense of the journey. Daniel, again, a manly, highly esteemed by God, and a man known as a man of prayer. You know, he prayed very publicly 3 times a day. And the point that he was highly esteemed is made separately 3 times here. So I think, again, known by his relationship with God, his close relationship. And then finally to Jesus. Now, only now with Jesus coming and with Jesus giving himself up to death on the cross, could we recover our relationship with God. So just to emphasize, this is what it took. The law was just a way station. This is what it really took, that Jesus, being in very nature God, didn't consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And so this brings us up to the New Testament and to the 4 Gospels. So moving on from the first metaphor, first way of looking at the Bible, I suggest also that the Bible is a wheel. And here's an extract from that wonderful passage where the risen Jesus meets the disciples on the road to Emmaus. And before they know who he is, he says to them, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. And I often wonder to myself, exactly which prophets he went through and exactly what he said. So what I've here's a couple of references from the prophets, from Isaiah and Micah, very well known examples, I think. But it's very conspicuous, I think, that in Isaiah 9, it specifies, but in the future he will honour Galilee of the nations. So that's very specific for a prophecy. It opens up the prophecy to being obviously correct or being proven correct or incorrect. And of course, we know that in time it was proven correct. Or similarly, in Micah 5:2, but you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. And it's notable that I believe there was more than one Bethlehem at the time, and the Ephrathah actually specifies which Bethlehem. So those are two examples of the sort of references to Jesus in the Old Testament, but there are many more. And this is where the wheel comes in. And this is my version of kind of the layout of the Bible. So the way to think of this is, it's like a bicycle wheel, but the books of the Bible are laid out. You have to kind of go anti-clockwise from where it says start, and you can see the broad categories. And in the Old Testament section, every line is a specific reference pointing to Jesus. Some of them are just allusions. I've been a bit liberal with that, but some of them are very specific, as we just covered. So the point I'm trying to make is that, say, with a bicycle wheel, if you imagine a bicycle wheel with a single spoke, then it wouldn't be very solid, would it? But because they're quite thin spokes in a bicycle wheel. But if you add lots of them up, then all of a sudden it becomes very solid. And so I think that I mean, there is obviously a huge story to tell about how the Bible came to us, its translation, and over the years and so on. I don't know that I'm the one to tell that, because I'm not trained in theology and so forth. Sorry, just keep an eye on the time there. Right, we should be nearly done. Yes, but I just wanted to kind of make the point of why it seems to me, without even looking into the archaeology, that the Bible is very solid, just in terms of how it all hangs together. So that's really the point. And there's all the references. And the PowerPoint file, I've expanded on them. So some are very direct, some are possible appearances of Jesus in the Old Testament, and some are just mere illusions, just sort of symbology of Jesus coming. So other factors that weigh in favour of authenticity, I think it's also very conspicuous that only Jesus' life on earth has such redundancy, 4 Gospels, and by such different people too, a tax collector, a doctor, and fisherman. And being who I am, of course, I immediately think of space flight. Who wouldn't? And I wonder to myself, is 4 a magic number? Because you may or may not have known that when the space shuttle was flying, then it had 4 core mission computers running in parallel, and they had like a voting system, and if any one of them went wrong, either software or hardware, then the others would outvote it. So just for the ascent phase and the descent phase, which are the most risky of the space shuttle's flight, it would be running these 4 parallel programs. It's a bit different when it was on orbit, but anyway. So where did that 4 come from? The 4 came from a NASA requirement which said we need, I think they call it in the trade something like 4 nines reliability. We need 99.99% reliability. I can't remember exactly how that works, but they specify a number of nines and they mean all of the nines, and their contractors have to prove it. So it seems to me very significant that God chose 4, the number of Gospels. And the other thing I would say is that you don't hear this said much, but there is a low level of differences between the various Gospels in the writing style and the wording. To my mind, that gives it an authentic ring. If it was rigged, then I would expect there to be more correspondence, someone to have sort of tried to align them more. But however, I did at one point find, and to be honest, there are probably a few cases where you can see things which make you wonder, this can't be right. And this was, here is one case, and I believe these two passages are parallels of the same event. And you can see that by he was in the vicinity of Tyre, and the remark later about the dogs under the table. Oh, sorry. Dogs under the table. I think I'm quite safe in suggesting that these two are the same event, and yet one says Canaanite and one says that the woman was born in Syria and Phoenicia. So that on the face of it could look like a contradiction, but when you actually look at a map, then you see the land of Canaan was really quite broad, and Phoenicia came in as the northern part of it. And what it doesn't mark on the map is that Tyre and Sidon are up here, sort of almost where Phoenicia overlaps the land of Canaan. Furthermore, if you look at how Canaan and Phoenicia are defined, and forgive me for using Wikipedia definitions, I'm sure there are some on the call who could find definitions with much greater authority, but I think this will do for these purposes. It's debated whether Phoenicians were actually distinct from the Canaanites at all. So really a simple appeal to geography shows that there was no real contradiction. And I think it's like that with all other contradictions, that when we look into it more, when we study the Bible, we will find that the contradictions vanish. So finally, my last, and actually when I looked it up, the Bible is brim full of references to light. And I've just chosen a few because we're talking about the Bible itself as opposed to the person of God and of Jesus Christ. So a couple of well-known references, both interestingly from the Psalms. Your word is a lamp for my feet, a light on my path. The unfolding of your word gives light. Both verses which I love. And I think this goes to live in a time, especially now, where there are so many ideas out there. There are lies, there is manipulation, there are wars, there's brainwashing going on, different ideologies, different politics, different religious cultures, different family traditions, the awful business of moral relativism. And I think that the Bible stands like a lighthouse in the storm, with the sweep of its friendly light showing us where the rocks are and showing us the way home. And Jesus attested to this. He said in Mark 13, when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, don't be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. If anyone says to you, look, here is the Messiah, or look, there he is, don't believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. So be on your guard. I have told you everything ahead of time. So I think there are a few verses which give us some pointers of how to recognize the truth, that people who are preaching truly, we can tell them by their fruit, by the result of their lives. Also the other point is that every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ, i.e. Jesus, the Messiah of God, has come in the flesh, is from God. And I think these are two really good ways we can distinguish truth from evil. So just a final recap, and then perhaps we can have some discussion. I suggest the Bible is a toolbox. It uses a variety of narrative forms to get across principles and insights to help us understand the importance of different choices and behaviours. And I kind of want to re-emphasize that the important thing is not the text, but the principles that the text conveys. And the Bible also repeats and re-emphasizes to convey the most important and urgent parts. And its whole purpose is to repair a broken relationship. And that's I think, explains the whole sweep of the Bible through the Old Testament, from the fall through the men of God, the patriarchs and the prophets. It's all about repairing our relationship with God. So the Bible is a bicycle wheel, and let's just check the time. Yes, I'm running a bit over. Its many internal cross-references give it cohesion, dependability, and it pinions on the person of Jesus Christ. And then the Bible is a lighthouse. It was written to survive through time, despite changing social trends and moral codes. It cuts through the fog and helps us to navigate the storm-tossed seas that life brings us. It shows us the rocks and it leads us home. So that's about it. All I've got to say, really. So perhaps we could open up for discussion now. So thank you very much for your time and attention. And let's see where we go.